Ever feel like your business is growing just fine on the outside, but your bank account looks like a job site porta potty after a chili cook off? Yeah, that's the growth gap. Somewhere between this $2 million and $10 million revenue mark, contractors hit this strange wall where jobs get bigger, the stress gets louder, and the numbers stop making sense. You're not broken, you're just running a $5 million company on a $2 million foundation. Today, we're talking about why contractors get stuck here and what to do about it. This is the Contractor Success Forum. I'm Wade Carpenter with Carpenter Company CPAs, alongside Stephen Brown with McDaniel Whitley Bonding and Insurance. Stephen, we often talk about the growth paradox, but today let's talk about what causes this.
I think this is a great idea. And we've talked about this before, but we've always said that construction companies, and I know it's all companies, but especially in construction, there's certain plateaus that you reach. And then there's the pains that come with the plateaus. But there's actually a term called the growth gap that you can look at and measure to see where you are and what your potential is and how much you're leaving on the table by not doing certain things.
Yeah, it's almost a predictable wall they hit between this $2 and $10 million mark. You're not failing, but your company is just hit this point where the old structure can no longer carry this load. I think of it like trying to run a high-rise building off a garden hose water line. You can only build so high before the pressure runs out. A lot of the times when we get in this stage, we still feel busy as we can be, like a kick bed or something like that. Cash gets tighter as the jobs get bigger and the overhead balloons up like a tarp catching the wind. So as I said, you're not broken. You're just running that $5 million company on this $2 million foundation. So what do we do about it?
I get what you're saying about the foundation. It's not built to support the load, right?
Right. Things have to change. You can no longer run everything yourself. You have to start relying on people. We've often talked about the cash flow strains and those kind of things, but we don't really talk about what causes it. And is there really this wall that people hit? Why do we hit these growth plateaus? So I wanted to walk through 4 or 5 different business books that talk about this thing and maybe dive into some reasons why.
Okay.
There was one called No Man's Land. The author was Doug Tatum. He talked about this $2 to $10 million zone where you're driving this truck that's too heavy for the brakes you got on your truck. You're too big to be small, and you're too small to be big. And you just can't seem to get past that pickup truck mindset and getting into the semi-truck world that you need to be into.
You're just full of analogies today. Keep going.
Well, Vern Harnish wrote one called Scaling Up, and he talks about a few different plateaus. They all talk about different revenue levels. He calls these plateaus these valleys of death, which sounds pretty dramatic, but any contractor that tries to get past this $3 million mark knows that's pretty accurate. Every level means upgrading your leadership, the tools, the way you upgrade equipment, and how do you handle bigger jobs. You may be getting into a different revenue level. So I think there's a lot of truth in that.
You're exactly right. There's so much truth in that. You think about reason the bonding companies require so much cash or working capital to prove your bonds. It's just simply because you need capital in order to grow. You need, of course, capital to make up for any losses you may have on a job. But when you talk about growth, I think, Wade, we're talking about the plateaus that are inherently there among construction companies in sales. And then you think about, okay, is this just happen organically, or am I actually thinking of how I want to grow to the next level, and how do I determine what that next level is?
Yeah. Just a few more of these books, just because I'm not making this up. Michael Gerber talks about it in the E-Myth Revisited, and the adolescent stage is what he calls it. And it's almost like you're hitting puberty. You're tall enough to reach the top shelf. Maybe you still got the pimples, but you're not really mature enough to drive that truck. It's just suddenly this business becomes too much for one person's shoulders. And that's what a lot of people are experiencing.
Oh, yeah. Puberty is a hair-raising experience. You remember that, Jeff?
It's been a long time since me and you went through puberty. But anyway, Gino Wickman, the book Traction, he talks about this organizational ceiling. It's like hitting your head on this low beam while you're in this crawl space. You can stay there, but nobody's going to enjoy being in that crawl space. It's like you can't get out of this proverbial hell that you're in.
What yet another great analogy. Okay.
So I'm just picking other people's. I got one more and I'll stop with them. But there was one and I'm probably going to butcher his name, Les McKeon. He wrote a book called Predictable Success. And he talks about this whitewater stage where your business is like this raft that's running into the rapids, and you've got a guide who's still reading the manual for this thing. You have the systems failing, you have everything all sort of like jostling around like the whitewater. People start falling out of the raft, and it becomes chaos.
All right, we've got all these allegories of too much of a load, whitewater rafting, your raft's maybe spinning out of control while your captain's reading a how-to book. All these analogies are great, but how do you bring order out of this chaos? How do you break it down and think, okay, where am I now and what do I need to do about it?
Part of what I wanted to do today was talk about some of the thoughts of what causes this and how do you get out of it. First of all, takes understanding what is happening. Number one, a lot of times contractors get in this, talk about the marketing dynamics. Your pricing breaks down. And so, how you are bidding jobs from the $1 to $2 million mark and then jumping up to these higher levels. Maybe you built your business on your handyman prices, but now you're building a federal courthouse. These bigger jobs require a lot more administration, more meetings, more paperwork, more risk. But too often the contractors keep pricing them like they were these simple jobs that they grew up on.
That's huge. There's a first stop. Recognize what it is that you are doing is taking you in the wrong direction. Back to the rafting analogy. You're going down the river. There's a certain rock. That rock may be underwater. It may be sticking straight up and you're running right into it. But you got to steer a course around it. And a lot of times you spend so much time going through the rapids that you just forget how to steer. There's my analogy.
Maybe, but you probably do have a different overhead structure. When you get to this level, you got more infrastructure you got to have in place to be able to support it. And your profit starts leaking out a lot faster than this cracked garden hose. I think the market dynamics and how you price your jobs and looking at your overhead structure is one of the major problems with it.
Okay.
I guess the second one I would say is the management dynamics. Yeah, you got more overhead, but you got staffing and leadership breakdown sometimes. The one owner that has been the unofficial superintendent, project manager, estimator, negotiator, therapist, and sometimes the janitor, they can't do all these things. And maybe they could do everything up to a point, but they're still the only ones with the keys. So everyone lines up at your truck every morning when you walk in the door. There's only so long you can do that, and there's only so much work you can support when you have that kind of structure.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, as owner of the construction company, are you the bottleneck that's keeping things from flowing? Are you the bottleneck that's holding things back? That's a tough call to make because you're so used to doing everything yourself and you're absolutely convinced nobody can do anything better than you, but you have to depend on so many different people.
Yeah, and that does take some doing to, number one, let go of some of those thoughts. A lot of times the constraint to growth lies in the owner being the bottleneck. It's a tough thing getting people that you trust and can rely on. Sometimes you put people in read on the bus that maybe they're not suited for. I still think of the email that revisited that the story about you put somebody in a position, then they leave, or you go through a bunch of people to find that one person. And meanwhile, they've been dragging you down for years because you can't seem to get that piece in place.
You were talking about that contractor taking the same mentality of smaller jobs into the bigger job workspace, like the carpenter that's building a new courthouse. That certain stage of development, I think anybody in the construction industry knows the difference. There's so much more. It's different on a different level. You just take what it takes to heat and air condition a giant, something like that. You take what it takes to roof it. You take what it takes to make it solid with thousands of people come and go, and you look at the plans of that project and you see how big it is. Why do contractors get stuck in each one of these areas? You mentioned pricing, staffing, overhead, and then their structure. Do you want to get into that a little bit more?
That all sort of interrelates. From a people standpoint, the owners hire everybody, but then all of a sudden they've got a huge crew and they can only do so much. Now you got to hire somebody for HR. Maybe you've had somebody doing your insurance that really doesn't know anything about bonding. We run into this. This is sort of our sweet spot that people get above this level and they know they need a higher quality, something more than a bookkeeper, but they really need some expertise. And growth at this stage really requires some leaders, not just warm bodies, ones that can step in and take the reins.
Yeah. It really helps too. I think we've talked so many times about your board of directors on your construction company. You said it was your sweet spot. It's our sweet spot too at McDaniel Whitley. You're having growing pains. You're having trouble with your insurance, your bonding, your accounting systems. These are things we see all the time. So you can say, who else better might give a podcast like this? Maybe a contractor that was an accountant and an insurance and bonding agent. I don't know. But my point is, we see this all the time, and we see the structures that we can help you with. We see the growing pains and the frustrations you have. So my advice is go to that board of directors, go to those advisors and tell them what your frustrations are and where you want to go and what your problems are. I think you'd be amazed at the answers you get. I think a lot of people just forget to ask.
Yeah, and sometimes you've done it all without that board of directors. If you've had some people advising you that are saying the same thing, maybe it's time to think about a different board of directors. Sometimes people are comfortable at a certain level, but they have no idea. They've never worked in that space either. That also sort of leads into the next one that's more of a financial dynamics. The overhead and the cash flow all seem to break down at this stage. You got overhead sort of like growing like kudzu. It
Mhm.
sort of sneaks up and spreads everywhere, and suddenly you can't see the building anymore.
Yeah, that's another good one. Like one Mississippi farmer said, you know how you grow kudzu, you just throw it on the ground and run like hell. No, I get it. Overhead like that. And you're like, what happened? And you're looking at your financials and you've already had 6 months of being busy running your projects. And all of a sudden you say, what? I spent what? How did it? And then you get mad about everything and you say, what am I going to do about it? And you're right. That upsets your cash flow. You're not billing properly. The cash is stopping. Maybe you're not pricing it right. But then again, how many podcasts have we done on this topic?
Yeah. And unfortunately, I've had one that's actually going through this really huge growth spurt right now. He's hiring, he's just taking on people left and right. And I know what he's trying to do, but he's failing with the cash flow because he hasn't realized that you got to start changing the pricing and the stuff's got to catch up to it. You need the infrastructure. Again, the owner starts getting, hey, I got a big job. Now I can afford this, but the cash has got to catch up. And you just can't keep pricing things like you used to.
Yeah. We talk about this way, and I think about our listeners who have hit these plateaus, have broken through, and then had problems as a result of not planning for that. Also, the contractors that are sitting there going, we're happy. We're doing X amount of volume a year, and we're happy with that. What would it look like if we push that to the next plateau? What would that look like? How do we measure that? Ideally, isn't it great that you don't find yourself in problems and figure out how to react, but you could just sit there and say, okay, I'm doing $10 million a year in sales and I want to do $18 million a year sales. There's a gap in growth of $8 million. How do we measure that? How do we plan for it before we go after it? What would it take? What would it look like? So we know in our mind what those systems and what that foundation needs to be in place before you start. And a lot of times I see so many contractors saying, I just need to get the volume up. My plate needs to be full. And then your plate's a little bit too full because you're so anxious about having that work on the books that you've already priced it. It's already set in stone. You've already committed to doing that project, those projects, multiple projects. And you're saying, okay, how do I go backwards from here? Because I just got too emotional about it and I jumped on too much work.
Yeah. That sort of leads into where I was going to go with the structure, but you just actually really reminded me. I had somebody reach out about 2 months ago that had read my book, and this was a bridge contractor that does 10 plus million a year. He had his son on the call, but after we were talking for a little bit, he kicked his son off the Zoom call and said, I want to admit this. I don't want my son to know this, but I have never paid myself. I'm always scrapping. And at that $10 million mark, everybody thinks they're going to get past that. I mean, every mark we think we were going to get there, but that was sort of eye opening to me. I know I've said it, but when you get somebody at 10 million that says, I've never paid myself in the entire history of this company,
Yeah.
that's really sad.
And we know that. As your accounts or bonding agent, we know when you're not paying yourself. And it is sad. I guess you're ashamed of the fact that you got so busy growing things for other people that you're not looking after yourself. And again, your book is perfect for that, Wade. I'm so glad he found it. Now tell him what wonderful things are going to happen with him and his son and his company. Now that light came on in his head. We talk about, I want to go back to the rafting analogy again, because you decide you're going to go down the river because it's a lot faster than walking. And you jump in a boat and you forget your paddle. You jump in. This is the whole analogy of saying, I'm going to grow. I'm going after more volume without planning for it. Okay. You're going to hit rocks. You're going to get stuck. You're going to get snagged. But even if you've done it, there's a way to work your way out of it, to think and plan your way out of it. And you just need someone else to help you see the forest through the trees. And that's why when you suggested this topic, Wade, I thought this is absolutely perfect, because this is exactly what we do. And if our podcast listeners can even remotely understand how many different customers we deal with and talk to and help through this all the time. We have our own case studies. It's something that's almost happening daily with us. And the reason we do what we do, because we love contractors. We love the construction business. Contractors are some of the greatest people on the face of the earth. It takes a unique person and people to be contractors. But here we are hitting these plateaus, hitting these growth stages, and all the stress that comes along with it.
Yeah. There was one more major area, and I know we're getting a little long on this. I was wanting to get into more of the how to fix it, but there's so much of it that all interrelates. And we talked about, like, maybe now you need somebody to be an HR manager. All of a sudden your growth, your structure breaks down. Now you have 5 project managers and they all do things a different way. You have to have structure in place, standard operating procedures written down. Otherwise, it becomes trying to frame this house where everybody has no plans and they just order truckloads of lumber and use what you can. But, that tribal knowledge that you had when you're growing, then you add 2 more estimators, they do things very differently. That all sort of goes out the window.
That house looks like the Winchester house.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Where the Winchester air lady kept building and building?
Yeah, you remember that one, huh? We can't run things the way we always run them. And again, they all interrelate. You got to have more people, more structure, and then it translates to more overhead. How do we break through this growth gap?
I feel like we need to let our listeners leave with an idea of the game plan here for handling the growth gap, for dealing with the situation you're in. Because right now, it's like we're trying to tell a whole book in 30 minutes when we're just hitting the premises of it. And again, your book so perfectly illustrates all these examples, but there are certain metrics, capacity, potential, and then on this growth gap that you have to measure. And it's just steps you take, right?
Just a couple of thoughts on each one of these things I threw out here. First of all, you really need to think about your real margin and driving your pricing, because as we said, the overhead structure probably has changed. You can't keep doing it the same way you've been doing it. And a lot of people get to this point and all of a sudden they are wondering why they're not making money on their jobs. And if you sort of hit this wall, have you taken a step back and, like, are we pricing these correctly? The second part is you may need a new mid-level management layer that we put in place. Somebody with the authority to train and say, this is where we're going to do things. And I'll be honest with you, I've worked with contractors, business owners of all kinds, really. Some people are not born leaders, and some people are not ones to say, he's a boss, but this is the way we got to do it here. A lot of people don't have that. So if it's not you and you're the constraint, maybe you should think about that.
Yeah.
Going back to the predictable overhead, the cash flow systems, I know I'm touting profit first. This is where we really need some structure, not only on how we're doing things, but our financial structure. And profit first, I think, encapsulates that if you can put some constraints around your cash. Again, a lot of it goes to organizational structure, but again, I don't want to belabor this one too much. If nothing else, I hope people started thinking about, are we at a spot that we just really can't grow through? Do you see that?
I do. And I want people to also think about the big picture. And you mentioned that just a minute ago, but that big picture is your margin of profit. And if you say to yourself, my goal is to operate within a gross profit margin of 3 to 5%, How do I manage that? Those margins, when you look at your projects and they're going up and down on their margins, then something's broken that needs to be fixed. And that's obvious to everyone in my line of business. But to you as a contractor, when you think about growth and volume and you say, can I get these margins? And the whole fun of the construction game, beside building great structures and wonderful things that people need and providing jobs for everyone, is when you say, I'm going to operate between this margin area, and then I'm going to absolutely push things to see if we can't tweak a little more margin out of it. And when you're doing that, you're forcing all your systems to perform better.
I know there's a lot to unpack on this one, and maybe we could do some deeper dives. But again, it reminds me of situations where, not just the bridge contractor that says he's never taken stuff, but I've also seen contractors that were actually taking home a decent salary, but then they jump over to this bigger tier. And now all of a sudden they can't take home a salary themselves and they're loaning the company money back and start mortgaging the house and those kind of things. If you hit this growth gap, as we called it on this episode, maybe think about doing some things differently. What do you need to do? Do you have the right board of directors that you talked about? Do you have the right people around you? The structure, the systems, the financial systems? It's just the whole infrastructure has to change sometimes. So if we made you think about it, we'd love some comments. Drop them in below. If you're running into some of these things yourself that we didn't talk about, let us know about it. We'd love to do a podcast episode about it. If you're hanging out with us this long, we appreciate it. We always appreciate if you like, share, subscribe. It always helps the channel out. And we will see you on the next show.